Hello, and welcome to Studmonger's Guide to Creating a Game Plan. Today we're going to go over how to come up with a basic strategy and how to choose tactics while doing so. This is going to go hand in hand with some other items we're talking about this week. I think the side notes this week is probably going to be on resource management. So that's going to be what we're looking at this week. But for the moment, we're looking at making a game plan. So we're going to talk about a couple of things to start off. First of all, we're going to talk about a game plan versus flowcharting. So the difference is that a game plan is a well thought out strategy that uses tactics allowed by your character in order to win games. So Oleander's basic game plan is get Fred, win game. So it's, obviously highly simplified, but Oleander's main goal in life is to get out Fred because Fred is absolutely nuts, and if you get him out, it's just your turn for as long as he's on the screen, and that's really difficult for basically every character in the cast to deal with. There's pretty much no escaping Fred for the time that he is out for any length of time, and you just have to deal with the fact that he is going to let Oleander do insane damage, have crazy mix-ups, and get a ton of meter back while she's doing it. And that last part is perhaps the most scary part. Even though she doesn't gain meter from hitting you with normals, she still gains meter from meter steal while she's doing combos to you when she has Fred. So she can throw out a epilogue, and if that hits you, it does an unbelievable amount of meter damage. So she can easily get back a bar or maybe more during the time that Fred is out while she's attacking your character and basically set up for the next round. Flowcharting is picking the same option in kind of micro situations over and over again. And that's closer to like tactics, where you figure out, like Oleander has an insanely high anti-air, and she's got several good, like a cross-up anti-air option and a good jumping anti-air option. And so what you'll see when you see someone flowcharting is that they find the good button and they just push that good button in a lot of places. Opponent is standing at this range from me. Like, no opponent other than Oleander in the game really has a great move that hits from that position. Push the move that hits from that position. All right, that's a good option. Opponent is, say, jumping. Do anti-air. Look at this anti-air. This anti-air is insane. So what you'll see is that flowcharting is often a replacement for thinking, whereas a game plan is using thinking to come up with a strategy that lets you win. So that's the big difference, right? And it's not like flowcharting is necessarily bad at its core. It's just that when it gets overused, you become predictable, and no matter what you're using, the best moves in the game, when predicted, can be beaten in any good fighting game. So, in this case, yes, the 5B is very good, but your opponent can jump over it. You have to treat it like a fireball in that respect, because it doesn't have any real vertical hitbox, and you can see that if we turn on the hitboxes here. You can see that opponents can just jump over it pretty easily. It doesn't ever go above her head. The hitbox is always slightly below her head, so you're probably losing to jump-ins most of the time. You'll occasionally clip one here and there and really frustrate an opponent who predicted correctly, and that's where like the flowcharting can become sort of memey and just let you win, but not because the flowchart itself is working, but because your opponent made a mistake and then they get tilted and then you win because they're tilted. So, game plan, good. Flowcharting, is acceptable, but you have to pay attention to when your opponent catches on and is adapting, and counter-adapt yourself. So it's not like using good moves in good situations is ever a bad idea. It's just when your opponent knows that that's what you're going to do every single time, it becomes very easy for them to adapt to and defeat. Whereas if you are playing around a little bit more and making it hard for them, right, this move still goes forward, and it's not going to hit from that range, but like if your opponent isn't Oleander, what do they have from that range that hits you back? Like So suddenly now if they're trying to jump over, occasionally they're just running into your 5B, and now you're no longer doing a flowchart so much as you are employing a tactic. And so let's go into what that is. Basically, a tactic is a short-term strategy that you can use with the tools you have at hand. And so for Oleander, our tools are these. And obviously, we've got a low and an overhead command normal. We have a ground bounce air normal. And we've got a double jump. Then she's got traps, fireballs, and teleports. And with magic, she can empower them or give herself different options, especially for the teleport that she wouldn't otherwise have. And then, of course, she has her Beam Super and Fred. So that's what we have to work with along with all of her normals. So what we want to do when we create a tactic is to look at our options and decide which ones are good, which ones are bad, and that will change depending upon situation. And that's why situational awareness or resource management, if you would like, are going to be super important. Obviously, you can have situational awareness in the match of like where your opponent is on the screen or whatever, but it's also going to be how much magic do they have, how much meter do they have, how many rounds are left, what health are people at, and you need to think about all of these things while creating a strategy and a tactic. So let's go through a few examples. So first, let's say that we're playing against another Oleander. And this is important because it requires us to create a game plan not against the character themselves because it's a 50-50 matchup. We all have the same tools. But we have to put a game plan together against our opponent. That isn't to say that a game plan against the character is bad. In fact, it's going to be mostly what we go over for this week. I'm going to pick one character each day, and that'll be the 7 days worth of stuff. But it is going to be pretty common for you to run into a mirror match, especially in a game that's got 7 characters in it. So you kind of want to know how to deal with players as part of your game plan. So let's start there. What we're going to figure out is at the beginning of the match, we're going to try to suss out what our opponent is good at, because we should know what we are good at. So for example, I have troubles with fireballs. I will occasionally get like I think you can even see it there. Yeah, I'll get a jump A when I'm trying to get a fireball, or I'll double jump accidentally when I'm trying to get one. So it'll be like that. And so my fireball game needs work. I know that I'm not great at the fireball game. So I can assume, and I may wind up being wrong, but I can assume that my opponent's fireball game is probably at least as good as, if not better than mine, in any given matchup. So if I am proven wrong, I might change tactics later, but I can assume that I don't want to be super far away from my opponent, especially without any magic, because that will mean that I have only fireballs and I am a very one-dimensional character. So my pressure, on the other hand, is okay. I'm not great at it, but it's better than my fireballs because I'm usually not making significant mistakes in the pressure, and so it makes it a lot easier for me to get pressure there. And then my neutral is probably the best thing I've got. I've played a lot of Smash Brothers where neutral is just a phenomenal part of the game, with lots of platforms and movement and picking your spots. And so even though some of that doesn't translate very well to the 2D fighting game, a lot of it transfers quite well enough that I've got a decent read on people. Like, I get good reads on people quickly. I can tell when somebody is just going to overextend and jump in, or if they're a frame lord and they don't realize that unless they're playing Oleander, after this fireball that's only -2, it's not actually their turn because they're half a screen away. So, like, a lot of times I'll be able to catch those players, and they get hit. They try to push a button from this position, not playing Oleander, and I just swing at them with a 5B, which is going to whiff, by the way, if they don't push a button. but I know they're going to push a button because they're +2. And so they just get hit. And so, I will oftentimes want to play neutral. So my best, like when I'm corner pressuring someone, some of my best pressure comes from being right about here, right under the timer, right out of like a range where a good hit will work here, right? I want to be like against Oleander, it's a little further away. Like we want the horn to be underneath the timer so that it just barely misses. But against most characters, we want we want Oleander herself to be right about under the timer. Most characters don't have a good threatening move from this position, but Oleander does. So we want to be right about here. Whereas if we're fighting against an Oleander, we want to be just out of the range where she's effective so that she has to make a big commitment. But we can always just dash back and then pick up space if they didn't take it. And we don't have a dash up low here from that position, but that's okay. We've got this, and really we're just trying to get an action out of our opponent. We might even whiff a jab on purpose just to see what they do. So oftentimes my best pressure is not the like in your face, am I going to do overhead, am I going to do the low, am I going to do like cross up, like that isn't my cup of tea pressure. So at least not in this game. So I've got to decide if my best pressure is actually just sitting here. And it might be. So I can use the tactics, even though my strategy is I got a knockdown, and so it's time to pressure my opponent. I have plenty of tools I have plenty of tools to do that, right? So the strategy, a smaller strategy or a larger tactic, is going to be get pressure when you're at advantage. But I have plenty of ways to do that. I can hit with normals from almost half screen. I can stay far away and throw fireballs. And this is pressure against characters that don't have fireballs because they have no recourse except for to get closer to me. And there's, get in, push buttons, B+, and just like do stuff. And all of those are very strong, but I have lots of options for pressure, you can see. I can choose which of those to do. So I have 3 different tactics for pressure that I can use when the strategy is make sure that you get pressure on the opponent. And then when I get a hit, it'll depend upon what I want to do then, right? Do I want to go for maximum damage because my opponent is close to dying or has a low HP pool in general, and I've got lots of resources so I can like 2-touch them or 3-touch them? Do I want to steal a lot of magic because it's the first round, and if I get a bunch of magic in this round, or a bunch of meter in this round, even if I somehow lose it, I will wind up having a much larger advantage in the next round, and my opponent will go in with a much bigger disadvantage because I will have stolen some of the meter they earned, and I will have gained a whole bunch of stolen meter from them, making it so that I have very powerful options in the second round when they don't. So there's all kinds of different things that I can choose to do. So how am I going to beat my opponent? So obviously we have to get 2 of their health bars down to 0 at some point in time, and Fred is a pivotal part of most of Oleander's strategies. But the way that we get there will depend upon what makes the most sense at the time. Like if we're just trouncing our opponent and we've got the meter, like it might just make more sense to take the round against our opponent and burn the meter than it does to try to get a Fred for next round. Because, at the point in time where we're trouncing them, we're already getting more meter than they are. They might have more meter in the second round because they didn't burn a super when we did. But we've got 2 rounds to build up another super, try to get Fred, and we're a round up, which means our opponent has to play differently, right? Our opponent has to play to beat us 2 rounds in a row. They can't play for meter for a round now. They can't play to try to sneak in, like learn, right? Like occasionally a player will like take a round and they'll just get stomped, and all they're doing is looking at all the options you choose, and then the next 2 or 3 rounds, they're just beating the options that they saw the first round, and if you don't adapt very quickly to the fact that they saw what you did and now they're just pressing buttons against those things, you're in trouble. So if you've beaten them once already, now they don't have the ability to do that. Now if they do that, they lose the game. And there are players out there who are even willing to do that. But you know what? If they're willing to give you a game to learn about the things you want to do, that's perfectly fine. You'll have 2 games to do it back to them right afterwards. So even if they successfully do it to you and then they start running their game plan, you get a whole game to do it right back to them. So it's perfectly fine. I think that just taking those rounds is super important. So basically our game plan is just going to be what's the best way to win in any given situation. And so we'll use the tactics that we think make the most sense in any given situation. We will try to change up tactics if we see that we are being adapted to. And that's the big one. Situational awareness is going to change our tactics in real time. So if we are playing against a character with some projectile invulnerable moves, and we throw a couple fireballs and they're just like jumping over them and sliding under them and invincible dashing through them, then that doesn't work. Now that doesn't mean that we can't pressure from full screen, but what that means is that we want to, do a crouch into a jab and maybe bait out like a reversal option or something, and suddenly we've got a very fast recovering move. They'll do an unsafe punish because they think that it's a fireball, and now we get a big hit. So we're still doing the same idea, right? Our strategy is still pressure our opponent from full screen because they're the one who has to be proactive, but now we're doing it in a slightly different way. We're pressuring by faking moves, right? Like a feint. And now the pressure is just the threat of fireball itself. It's not even a real fireball. Just the threat of fireball is causing our opponent to jump in on our 6A follow-up to this, right? And or to slide in and get caught by the low that we can do immediately afterwards, or whatever. So we've got a bunch of options that still allow us to pressure from full screen, even if it isn't necessarily throw a bunch of fireballs. So yeah, it's just going to be a lot of that kind of thing. Obviously, we'll be talking about characters in general and what to do against them. But you also just have to read your opponent. And that's probably the single most important thing that you can do when you're playing, because eventually, no matter where you are currently in skill level, eventually you will not be able to beat an opponent with the strategy that you start, or with the tactics you started the game with. Eventually you get to a point where you have to continue adapting and continue making changes on the fly and paying attention to your resources and your screen positioning and how many rounds are left and what your hit point total is at and whether or not you have your cool, crazy anime game mechanic or whatever. And the only way that you're going to beat really strong players is by adapting to them. And that's going to be how you do it, is by starting with a solid game plan and then adjusting that game plan on the fly as necessary to get the W. So obviously at lower levels you're more likely to find players who have bad habits and be able to abuse those quite often, or set up positions where you can bait your opponent into doing them, and that's definitely a part of the game plan, right? If you know that your opponent is going to try to come in with their approach immediately after you throw a fireball from this position, every single time they're going to throw a jab, like against almost every character in the game except for the mirror match, Oleander's buttons just win anyway because it's too far away for any other character to approach you and hit you. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're just going to be going through with the information I know. Full disclosure, obviously, even with the 100 X hours I have in this game, I am still quite new at it. I don't have a ton of character experience. Like if I had played, I think I have 140 hours, so if I had played every character evenly up to this point, I would have only 20 hours of experience between all of them. So obviously, I've looked up some other commentaries and guides on characters and that sort of thing from players who have played a whole lot more than me, and so I'll be using that as well. But still, take what I say with a grain of salt. This is a still fairly beginning. This is my very first game plan for this game, so it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be flaws in it, but that's okay because the game plan is the basis upon which we can build to become a better player. And as we build on things and come up with ways that our game plan needs to be adjusted in order to win, the options that we choose to cover our gaps become our play style. And that is what we're looking to achieve now. And if we can use our game plan to create a custom play style of how we respond to things and what answers we have to certain situations, that's where we can really get into our groove and become a phenomenal player. Like this, if we can do it successfully, is where we go from kind of learning the game and learning the combos and learning the mechanics and pushing buttons and seeing what happens to really starting to be able to play the game. And that's really exciting. And as we do that, I hope to see you there.